Hello, I'm Eric Buck with RE/MAX Properties of the Summit. Today's tutorial is going to be about a couple of disclosure documents that you're likely to come across if you're buying or selling property here in the state of Colorado. Our first document is the square footage disclosure. This is a disclosure made by the listing broker to both the buyer and seller, identifying how the listing broker determined the square footage of the property. In some cases, he may measure it himself, and there's check-off boxes there for the type of system he used to measure. But more likely, he used some third-party source, typically the county assessor's office, but it could be building plans, could be certificates of occupancy, or other documents. This disclosure form will disclose the actual square footage number he's using and where that number came from. Now, your signing this document is merely acknowledgement that you have received it. It doesn't mean that you necessarily agree with the number that's on the form. If it's really important to you to know the exact square footage number, then it's your obligation to hire someone to come in and do that measurement themselves. This is a mandatory form for the listing broker to complete, and it is one that you should sign to acknowledge receipt. Our second document is a seller's property disclosure. This is a form completed by the seller. Now, you don't have to do a seller's property disclosure. It's an item that's actually negotiated in the contract. If the contract specifies that you'll provide one, then the seller does have to provide the disclosure. A couple of important things about the disclosure. It's going to ask a lot of questions, many of which the seller may not know the answer to. The age of the roof, the type of piping, the capacity of the electrical panel. These are all things that he may not particularly know offhand. He has no obligation to go find out that information. There's a column on the form where he can check, I do not know. But if you do know of any issues, then it is important that you disclose them on this form. In fact, it's a legal obligation for the seller to disclose any latent defects in the home. The same is true for either the listing broker or the buyer's broker. If they know of any latent defects, they have to disclose them as well. They don't have to investigate and find those defects, but if they happen to know of them, then they do have to be disclosed. Now, this is a form that should be completed by the seller. The listing broker or buyer broker should not be involved in preparation of this form. It's also important to understand that this form is in no way a guarantee. This is just disclosing what the seller supposedly does or does not know. So the buyer afterwards cannot come back and say, hey, you checked on this form that you weren't aware of a problem with the plumbing, and there was one. Now, if the buyer has some evidence that the seller did know ahead of time, then he could come after him for not disclosing that latent defect. But it's important to understand that this is no particular guarantee of the condition of the home. Again, a buyer, while this is useful information, should get an independent inspector to come in and inspect the home as well. So I hope that information on the seller's property disclosure and the square footage disclosure was informative. If you need any additional information or have any other questions, please feel free to give me a call at 970-406-0858 or send me an email, ecbuck@ownthesummit.com.